we have a wonderful guest with us joining today. He's Ryan Childers from the managing director himself of the Resource Management Institute. Ryan is a subject matter expert and has a long career in resource management practices. Excited to have you on board, Ryan.
Awesome. Thank you.
Right. Before we get started, just some webinar housekeeping callouts. Feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A section of the webinar here, and we will try to answer as many of those possible. We will be recording this webinar and sending you the link in a follow-up email. And if you find anything interesting, do hit talk to us, and somebody from the Rocketlane team would definitely take you through a one-on-one demo of everything that we speak about here today. I'm Arushi Ladha. I'm the founding product manager at Rocketlane. Had a wonderful opportunity of launching multi-million dollar products at Freshworks before this, and at Rocketlane, I've been running our whole PSA module and scaling this company as we go. Rocketlane is a customer purpose built client delivery project delivery software, and what we mean by that is the tool is built ground up to keep your client at the center of your entire project delivery experience. So you don't only get all the nuances of a very modern PSA, but we also give you what we have learned through our journey of delivering some brilliant customer experiences through our previous organizations. And we have Ryan with us from the Resource Management Institute, and I will hand it over to Ryan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arushi. Well, hello, everyone. Really glad to be with you here today. As Arushi mentioned, my name is Ryan Childers. I'm the managing director of the Resource Management Institute. Super excited to be with you and not only talk about resource management, but get into a couple of topics underneath resource management that we are super passionate about. And so we're going to get into it here in just a second. Before we do, I thought I would take just a minute to a little bit more formally introduce the Resource Management Institute. I know some of you may be finding us for the first time, and so I'll give you a little bit of background here. So as an institute, we were established back in 2016, and since then we've grown to be an over 4,000 member resource management community. So the cool part about that is 4,000 members of folks that all care about resource management just as much as we all do. And we've all come together to try to learn together, learn from each other, and get better at what it is we do day in and day out. And so the best way to think about the RMI is we are 100% dedicated to the advancement of resource and workforce management, education, thought leadership, leading practices, and standards. Now, we do that through a number of educational pieces. We have thought leadership white papers on resource management, and we prescribe a series of leading practices through some of the things that I'm going to share with you today, and especially our RMI playbook. We do market research every quarter where we bring and pull out of the RMI community, pull benchmark data and share it with our entire membership. So as you're working through things in your organization, the data is super helpful to support the causes you have and get you headed in the right direction. Of course, we have our globally recognized resource management training and certification program that we call RMCP, where we teach our just-in-time resourcing brand of global resource management. A couple of other things we do as an institute: we host industry collaboration events, very similar to this one, and then a couple of things in person as well. And then we do have a maturity model around resource management that our members have found super helpful as well. And so with that, I will say I'm going to give everyone an invitation. We're welcoming new members into the RMI. So this is your formal invitation if you're finding us for the first time to come and join the 4,000 member community. There's a couple of ways you can do that. If you follow the link there at the bottom of the screen, that'll take you out to our website. There you'll find in the upper right-hand corner a big blue join button. If you click that and share a little bit of information with us, you're in, you're part of the community at that point. The other way you can get at it is if you see on the screen in the upper right-hand corner, there's a QR code that will take you right to the join page. Same process, give us a little bit of information. You're in at that point. Once you become a member of the RMI, you get access to RMI Insight and white papers on our resource management best practices. You get access to all of our market research. Because you're in our system, that puts you on our mailing list. So you'll get invitations to upcoming RMI events. And then we do have on the website some recordings of some of our previous events that you can tap into as well. Now, the best part about all of this is you not only get all those benefits, but it's a great deal because it's free to join. It's free to join the RMI, become part of the community, and start to collaborate with others that are interested in resource management. So if you would say, absolutely, I'm all in on resource management, or I'm just starting to get exposed to it, come join the fun in the RMI, and let's learn together. All right, let's get into this. So we're going to talk resource management, and I'll tell you, we've been out there promoting resource management for a long time. And one of the things we like to just lead off with is our view of the world. Resource management is absolutely strategic in any services organization to our ability to be good at what it is we do, our ability to scale, and all the things that includes. And I'm going to tell you why. So if you think about it, labor is the single biggest cost line item for service providers today. Resource management is the primary driver of project performance and customer service. Now let's break this down just a little bit. So as a services organization, you can have the best implementation methodology, the best project delivery methodology, all the project management processes, quality processes, all of those things. But if you can't get the right person in the right place at the right time and do that consistently and predictably, project performance will absolutely suffer, customer service will suffer, and customer satisfaction will suffer as a result. And so for us, we have to get better discipline behind our most strategic asset for all of us, and that's our people, right? That's our people, that's our passion. And so we get asked a lot, what does good resource management look like? And I want to do a couple of things with this. So first, I want you to think about the outcomes we're all trying to achieve in our services organizations. Of course, we're delivering on the work that we do for our customers day in and day out. And so we're trying to achieve what we call project excellence, delivering on time, on budget, good quality work within the scope that we've committed to with them. We're all trying to hit our target utilization. Super important for all of us as we think about profitability, right? So hitting our target utilization at the individual level, at the team level, department level, practice level, all those things. We've also got to produce satisfied customers and do our part towards creating a good experience for our employees and having positive employee engagement. Now, getting to those outcomes requires some resource management focus, and it's all about getting the right person in the right place at the right time. So take that, let's rebuild it here for just a second. And so the way we would define what good resource management looks like, what resource management excellence looks like, is when, as a service delivery function, we can, and these are two really powerful words for us, when we can consistently and predictably get the right person in the right place at the right time to deliver on those outcomes we're trying to get to. And that's what we're trying to work towards. That's what we're trying to achieve as a resource management function, is getting to resource management excellence. And so that brings us to what we're going to focus on as part of today's webcast. And so it's all about unlocking efficiency. And we're going to talk about three really important topics to help us unlock efficiency. And the first is forecasting. So getting into resource forecasting. Now, an interesting statistic you see there on the right side of the screen, and this stat's been around for a long time, and unfortunately it hasn't changed very much. A little over a third of every project that gets started in the course of a year will fail at some level of being delivered on time, on budget, or with good quality. Now, while that's a troubling statistic, I'm more interested in understanding why is that the case and how do we go tackle that? How do we get better and try to bring that number down? What we find is the number one reason we fail at that level is because as organizations, we're having trouble getting the right person with the right skills to the right place at the right time. That's what we're going to try to unlock with forecasting and capacity planning today. We're also going to talk about some strategies to optimize utilization. Now, utilization is really interesting. For a lot of organizations, we know it continues to be a focal point, and there's emphasis on the fundamentals of better metrics, better governance, better management. We're still seeing a lot of challenges that remain in terms of both process and technology in support of effective utilization. So we're going to talk about ways we optimize utilization, again, as part of today's session. And then tools, right? So, we'll talk a lot about process, talk a lot about data today, but we would be naive if we thought we could go at resource management from a process and data standpoint and not infuse automation through the tools that we have as part of our environment. And so we have to have optimized use of those automation tools. And that's what Arushi is going to come in, and she's going to talk about some of the things Rocketlane doing, some of the cool stuff. So something we can look forward to as part of today's session as well. So 3 things we're going to focus on. Now, when I like to do these, I'm going to issue a little bit of a challenge here. And so I told you we're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk about forecasting, capacity planning. We'll lump that under one item there. We're going to talk about utilization, then we're going to talk about some technology. And so as we go through each one, I want you to think about where your organization is in each of those areas. Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? So do a little bit of a self-assessment there. And then come away from today with an understanding of where do you need to go to work, right? What is it you need to work on? And here's the challenge. We all get invited to a whole bunch of webinars and sign up for a whole bunch of things. Sometimes we come away with, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed with so many things I need to work on. What I would challenge you to think about is boil that down to one thing or a couple of things. Look for that thing that you can take back to your organization and really move the needle or turn the dial on. Okay. So that's your challenge. Find the one thing that you can take away today. Now, as I get into forecasting, capacity planning, and utilization, I wanted to just bring a few RMI resources to the forefront here and just start to expose you to them ever so slightly, because this is where some of the content's coming from. And so what we're going to talk about is we're going to bring out the RMI playbook. Now, the playbook's comprised of 10 plays. We're going to talk about 3 of those plays and use those to guide the discussion today. One of the other things that's super important, I mentioned it earlier, is our Resource Management Certified Professional Program, or RMCP. I've actually pulled some of the content, I've pulled some excerpts from the content that I'm going to teach from as we go through today's session. So a little bit of a highlight there for you as well. Everything we're going to talk about, we prescribe in our resource management maturity model. And so that's another resource that's available for free out on the website for RMI members. So you get a little bit of a sample there on the right side of the screen. And then I'm going to bring in some data. I'm going to bring in some data and use that to illustrate a few of the points that I'm going to make. And the data comes from our quarterly survey series, where we're conducting surveys, pulling those into research reports, and then sharing them with the RMI membership as well. So you'll get a little bit of a taste of some of our survey data as we go here. All right, let's go to the playbook. So I mentioned we're going to work on 3 plays here. So play 6 in the playbook tells us we need to leverage a robust forecasting and capacity planning capability to meet the dynamic needs of our business. That's the first thing we're going to talk about. Play number 8 is we need to institute a robust governance framework, and this is where we're putting utilization. So institute a robust governance framework to help us monitor adherence to all of our resource management processes and all the standards we've defined for it. Ensure quality data. We'll touch a lot on quality data all throughout today's session. And then, of course, measure RM effectiveness, and that's where utilization comes into play. And then play number 9, again, we've got to have the ability to automate our resource management processes. And we would prescribe doing that in what we think of as best of breed technology. And that's where Arushi is going to come into play and share some of those cool things that Rocketlane doing for us as well. And then that technology has to be integrated within our technology ecosystem. Super, super important that we get that part right as well. All right, so let's get into forecasting. Now, I'm going to come out strong here and just make a statement and say, very simply put, when we think about forecasting and the impact it has on resource management, forecasting is the difference. And I wish I could highlight the difference. It is the difference between being proactive and reactive when it comes to all things resource management. Our ability to get good at forecasting unlocks the ability to be more proactive than reactive. And who wouldn't want to be more proactive, right? We'd rather play from ahead from behind. I'd rather be on my toes than on my heels. Pick your analogy of choice. Being proactive is super important for us in resource management. Now, I'm going to give you 2 words that really jump out to me when I think about resource forecasting. And those 2 words are a product of good resource forecasting. Resource forecasting gives us visibility and it gives us time. And every classroom I've been in, when we've gone through the RMCP certification program, we talk a lot about the importance of visibility and time when it comes to forecasting. I want to know what's coming so that I can get prepared for it, right? I don't like surprises. You've probably heard a bunch of people say, I hate surprises. We want to be prepared, right? We want to get out in front of things and work from ahead instead of constantly reacting and being in that reactionary mode. So forecasting gives us that visibility to where we know what's coming, and it creates the element of time. And with time, I can put plans in place to do stuff, whether that's spinning up a new resource, putting resources, hiring new resources and getting them trained up, getting a contractor, right? Pulling someone from another area in the organization. With time, I have more options at my disposal. I think of poor forecasting and I think of this reactionary mode as, pick your sport of choice, whether it's basketball or baseball or hockey or whatever it might be. It's like playing that sport with one arm tied behind your back. Your options are limited, right? It limits your capability, and that's especially true in resource management. So forecasting, big difference between it is the difference between being proactive and reactive in all things resource management. So I thought we would, as we dive into this, I thought I would pull out of our training and certification program, thought I would pull out our view of how we define resource forecasting, kind of teach from this for just a second. And so when we think about a definition of resource forecasting, it's like any forecasting system, whether it's forecasting resources, forecasting revenue, whatever it might be, the focus is clearly out on the future. And our ability to forecast resources goes a long way towards enabling and improving our ability to proactively meet the needs of our future demand, ensure effective utilization of teams. So there you see the tie-in between forecasting and utilization, and it has a positive impact on one of those key outcomes we talked about earlier, which is getting to project excellence, right? Delivering on time, on budget. And I would append to this definition, I would append quality to that as well. Now, when we think about resource forecasting, there's a supply side and a demand side. And so this is kind of an interesting way to think about the world. On the demand side, our resource forecast has to define our demand by client, by project, and by resource type, which is the fancy way of saying by role, over some period of time. Now, we prescribe here 30 to 180 days. Let's talk about that spectrum just a little bit. So, on one end, you've got 30 days. That's a pretty narrow time frame. Pretty hard to go if you have to go, if you're short on capacity, you have to go hire someone. Pretty tough to get them through the hiring process, even if you have recs open. Get them through the hiring process, get them through the onboarding process to where they can be ready in 30 days. It's just a narrow window. We also know on the other end of the spectrum, 180 days, when we look that far out into the future and try to understand what our demand is going to look like, the data gets squishy, right? It's not nearly as reliable. You've got the stereotypical sales behavior, I'll put that in quotes, sales behavior, the sandbagging, the overly optimistic behavior. We know all of those things. And so there's got to be a sweet spot somewhere in the middle, and I would call that somewhere in that 90 to 100, 120 day range, where we can start to get some pretty good visibility into those things I mentioned. Demand defined by client, by project, and by role in that window. Now, flip over to the supply side. We have to identify sources of available, and that's the long way of saying our bench. So resources that are sitting on our bench, and those resources that are assigned to projects that are likely to roll off in the future. We need to know where those are and understand that for our existing resource pool. And also, we need to be cognizant of where the organization has hiring plans. When are we going to inject additional capacity into our supply as well? Now, when we bring the two sides together and we think about overlaying our supply and demand, that goes a long way towards supporting the definition or enabling us to define the actions that are necessary to align our supply with what our demand is telling us we're going to need in order to fulfill that demand. So that's the way we think about resource forecasting here. Now, I'm going to come out and give you some bad news. So the bad news, and this may not be surprising depending on your forecasting capability, I'm going to paint with a really broad brush here and talk about the resource management discipline and say resource forecasting is one of those big things that needs work. And I'm going to back it up with some data. And this is some data that comes out of our RMI survey series that I mentioned. In Q1 of this year, we ran what we call our Inhibitors to Effective Resource Management survey. And forecasting and capacity planning was yet again deemed the #1 inhibitor to effective resource management from a process standpoint and from an automation standpoint. So both process and automation, forecasting, capacity planning, the single biggest inhibitor to effective resource management. Now, that's interesting, not surprising, but interesting, where my mind goes is, okay, so what? So what that data is out there? What's under the covers here? What's going on? What's preventing us from getting better at resource forecasting? And this likely varies from organization to organization. For some, it's not having a formal methodology in place. For others, it may be a lack of being able to get a baseline forecast and seeing what that looks like. Data and process issues, and we're going to talk more about data and process issues as we go here. Could be the data is not up to date and it gets out of date very, very quickly. The data is incomplete or unreliable. We're not able to get our arms around all of our drivers of demand, or we're not very confident in what our data is telling us. It's inconsistent. Gosh, that's one of the most problematic areas. We've got demand, it seems like, coming from everywhere in a whole bunch of different formats, something we've got to fight through. And then getting it into a centralized repository, super important that we do that as well. On the process side, it could be poor process design, poor implementation. You don't have the right people participating in processes. And even if they do, they're not following the process as it was designed and as it was to be executed. Or we don't have interlock processes, which is our vehicle to drive accountability in not only participation, but bringing accurate data so that we can do something with it as part of the forecasting process. So a lot of challenges out there when it comes to effective forecasting and capacity planning. So I thought I would do just a short exercise here when it comes to getting what we all want, right? Which is an accurate forecast and capacity plan. That's a goal here. We want something that's accurate so that we can tap into the visibility and time piece and get our supply aligned with our demand. And so as part of the exercise, I want to go back to something Stephen Covey said, which is begin with the end in mind. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to put our road out here and we're going to start at the end and say, we want an accurate forecast and capacity plan. Wouldn't it be great if we knew how many FTEs we needed and exactly when we were going to need them? And not only that, could we click into it and start to identify not only bodies, but how many roles and what skills do we need as well? And then start to develop a plan to align our supply with our forecasted demand. That's the outcome we're trying to drive towards with good forecasting and capacity planning. Now, in order to get there, we need an automation tool. We need an automation tool that's in place, best of breed, that integrates within our technology ecosystem, enables us to overlay supply and demand. Now, we can have that tool in place, but again, in order to get to that outcome, we need a couple of things. We need good demand data. We need demand data that we would characterize as a project schedule view that tells us what roles we need, what skills we need, how much of a person's time or how much of an FTE's time are we going to need, what's the start date, the end date, and location, a whole bunch of other pieces as well. Well, that's dependent on having good demand planning processes in place that not only manage opportunities, but having some way, somehow, to take opportunities that are out in a sales pipeline and decompose them into that project schedule view I mentioned with role, skills, allocation percentage, start date, end date, and so forth, and then being able to track and manage our backlog of projects, our in-flight projects, and then having interlocks at multiple levels as well. So here's where the exercise comes into play. Let's play the what if game. What if we don't have well-defined forecasting and capacity planning processes? What if we don't get good demand data coming in? Well, it impacts our data, right? So we have bad demand data that we're working with, which makes its way into our automation tool. And our poor automation tool, probably implemented well, probably doing exactly what we intended for it to do. But because we have bad processes, bad data, we end up with an inaccurate capacity plan that we're making decisions on. Oops, that's not good. That's not good. Let's try it again. What if we invest in forecasting and capacity planning processes and we get that rhythm right? We get it right, we have the right people participating, but they don't provide good data, or the data gets out of date in a hurry. It's still in our automation tool. That automation tool is plugging along, doing exactly what we want it to do. We still end up in the same spot, a bad capacity plan, and we're making decisions off of that capacity plan. And so the moral of all of this is forecasting capacity planning requires an investment in getting our underlying processes and data right and getting them accurate. And so I thought we would go to the field and just say, I know we're all saying, we've all said some of these things, all the reasons why we're struggling with processes, struggling with data when it comes to forecasting capacity plans. So we're just going to turn some cards over and surface some of these. And I'm sure many of you have said some of these very things. I know I have. Our sales data simply is not accurate. Our business is fluid. It changes a lot. That makes this really, really hard. If only our PMs would do their thing and keep their project plans up to date, that would help us a ton. Our work's complex. We're just not like other organizations, and so we're struggling with it. And if we could just get more visibility into extensions, I know what a house of cards resource management can be if you don't have your arms around all of your drivers of demand, and extensions are a big, big piece of that, right? And so these are all challenges that we have to work our way through. And it starts with being able to focus on process and data and forecast and being able to characterize our demand. And so this is coming right out of our certification program. And so we're gonna work on this here for just a second. You see the key process elements when it comes to being able to characterize our demand. And again, it's a process and data thing. Here's what's happening, right? We know sales is generating their pipeline, and there are way too many organizations that celebrate and spike the football when they get that first sales pipeline report and they can start to see deals that are coming. That's fine. That's a good starting point. We need to know what's coming, the timing, the stage, the status, all those things. Super important to get that. The next step is the big one, having some mechanism to where delivery can step in, take that opportunity in the pipeline, and decompose it into our project plan with the roles we need, the skills we need, start date, end date, allocation percentage. We're really handcuffed until we execute that second step there. And then we have to have ongoing updates to our backlog, of course. And then resource management, right? Has to align current and future resource capacity against demand so that we know what we're working with. Now, how do we build up to being able to execute that and do it really, really well? Well, it's about being able to baseline and normalize our demand. So, identifying all of our sources of demand, who's generating demand for our resources, and how does that demand come in? Getting a common format where all resource requests look and feel exactly the same. We have consistent language for how to request each role. No more rogue resource requests. We got to ferret all that stuff out. And then have a cycle of meetings to help us keep our data fresh and solicit emerging needs. And as things change, we can stay in tune with what's happening, and then the ability to analyze and produce analytics about our demand in terms of roles, skills, dates, and all of those things. So this is a big piece to the puzzle, is being able to characterize our data. So let's attack that data piece and attack some of the challenges. And what I would tell you is you've got to get to the root cause if you do have data issues, and we're just going to turn some of those over. And so, one root cause that we see a lot is our business is fluid. We've got constant change. That's the reality we deal with. As much as we can do to simplify what we sell and how we deliver it, we'll start to attack that particular root cause when it comes to data. Can't get sales. We're struggling with sales and getting them to manage their data very well. And that's something that's just, we're going to throw our hands up. It's out of our control. We can help. Think about data intermediaries. We have overlay resources in different places. How do you overlay delivery to sales, right? Have someone that does that decomposition I mentioned. We have project plans that are very complex, very granular. All right, let's take a step back and let's look at those again and see if we can simplify the project structure. Our PMs are struggling to keep things up to date, struggling to keep track of extensions. Okay, fine. Let's go back and let's analyze their plate. What's it mean to be a PM? What are they working on? How do we start to prioritize the things that we need in order to strategically manage our resources? And so, again, I offer some of these in terms of being able to get your data right. So what good looks like when it comes to forecasting and capacity planning, it's what you see here on the screen. Here are the ingredients, and you've got both. You've got the word version and you've got the visual version here. It starts at the top with having a forecasting methodology in place. There's got to be a method to the madness for how you're going to attack the forecasting process, and then having good process discipline in place to get demand and supply data inputs that get aggregated into a central repository. And that's where your PSA, your PPM, or your resource management only solution really come to the forefront here. That's the central repository. So we've got to get the data in there, having interlock processes to drive governance and accountability, keep our data fresh, accurate, and up to date. And then having a decision-making framework so that we can start to understand, what does normal look like, what do we need to react to, so that we know when it's time to hit the panic button if we need to. When's that tidal wave of demand coming in? And it really boils down to establishing action plans so that we can align our supply with our forecasted demand. So just a couple of tips from the trenches, and then we'll move on to utilization here in just a second. So, what I would offer up from our experience working in forecasting capacity planning as part of effective resource management for a long time, it starts with clearly identifying the objectives of forecasting and who benefits, especially if you want to drive participation and accountability to the process. You see our hint there on the right side of the screen. Everyone benefits if we do this and do it really, really well, even sales. Got to get your arms around all drivers of demand. If you don't have your arms around all drivers of demand, you're going to be fighting blind spots. And again, the house of cards analogy, I think, plays really, really well here. If you have blind spots, it's going to rip apart the foundation of your house of cards very, very quickly. So think about where all of your demand comes from. And then again, get that normalized into a common format. So, the days of getting that email where someone's requesting a resource, or the hallway conversations, the phone calls, the text messages, the Slack messages, all that stuff, all those rogue ways for resource requests to come in, you got to do away with all that stuff. There's a consistent way to do it. Here's exactly what we need in order to initiate a request. You've got to be really, really specific there. Again, fight through those root causes I mentioned when it comes to data issues. Interlocks are super, super important. That's one of the foundational components we teach as part of our certification program. So if that's an area of need, and then we have some white papers on it as well, you can tap into some other RMI resources there. The last thing I'll mention when it comes to forecasting and capacity planning is you've got to make this as easy as possible for the stakeholders you're counting on to participate in the process. Keep it as easy as possible for them so that they keep their information up to date. And there are a lot of ways you can do that, but just kind of keep that concept in mind. Keep it easy, drive participation, refine data over time. All right, let's move on to utilization here. We'll spend a few minutes on that, and then we'll bring Arushi in to show us some things in Rocketlane. So play number 8, just to reiterate, we want to institute a robust governance framework to monitor adherence to RM process standards, get to quality data, and measure our effectiveness. So a question that's been posed in a few different industry groups, it was a little weird to me, but it really stood out to me. It's the idea of challenging whether utilization is still important as a metric. And I know there's a lot of as a service stuff, some cataloging, some doing work as credits or tokens and all that stuff. And so I was determined, I want to know the answer. Is utilization still important or not? So we asked in Q3, so just a few months ago, we asked RMI members to take a survey on utilization. And here's what we found. 96% of those, and this is a big population of people, in 96% of the organizations they represent, utilization performance was recognized as either extremely important or it's increased in importance over the past year. Now that's interesting. It's also interesting that 56% of those same organizations saw utilization performance as an inhibitor to business or customer outcomes. So there's work to be done. And so when we think about what's getting in the way of utilization, what we found, that was another question we asked. What we found is most felt like accountability in their organization was the biggest inhibitor. So pretty interesting. We have an accountability issue, which you would think would point fingers at leadership. That wasn't the case in our data and what we saw. So if leadership's not an inhibitor, we were challenging the process and thinking through, okay, what's blocking organizational accountability and adherence? And so for us, it's about establishing better governance practices around utilization. That's where our indications are. And so a couple of things I want to offer in terms of leading practices around utilization and governance, kind of in that same vein. First and foremost, have to establish a standard baseline. And for us, we prescribe the 2080 standard as your baseline denominator. And that's 52 weeks times 40 hours. I know there are a lot of regional variances and all that stuff, but subscribing to a standard allows you to do benchmarking against others, do some peer-to-peer collaboration and measurement. The 2080 standard is super, super important, as is getting your time categories right. So, billable utilization, pretty easy to measure. Billable hours divided by your baseline denominator. When you think about productive utilization, we have other members who are doing positive utilization and some other cool things with that utilization metric. What goes into the numerator? Well, it starts with being able to measure things through time categories and through the time tracking process. So, super important that we get those right, as is ownership. So, having ownership of utilization targets at the appropriate level. So, thinking through who is the one that's driving the utilization metric, and establishing those targets, driving people towards hitting targets, and then putting utilization targets in things like company goals and compensation, or perhaps both. So, just some things to kind of think about there. And then publishing utilization results, we say at least monthly, if not a little bit more frequently. I was an athlete, and I'm a big sports guy. The analogy here for me is the scoreboard. We all like looking up at the scoreboard periodically to see what the score is, and that dictates whether we need to, go on offense a little bit more, play a little more defense. So the ability to see where we are utilization wise, goes into looking at the scoreboard, and it drives some actions as well. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Arushi, and she's going to talk about play number 9, which is automating RM processes and best of breed technology. She's going to bring Rocketlane to the forefront here and show us some really, really cool stuff. So, Arushi, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Ryan. And thank you so much for that very engaging presentation. I'm very excited to take over and talk about a lot of things that Ryan spoke about and actually may show you those in action. So, a lot of today's product presentation that I have is going to be centered around how you can get that forecasting piece right in Rocketlane. And I think one thing that is critical about forecasting your demand and everything correctly is how do you ensure that the data in your system is accurate? Unless you have really good base data in your system, any forecast that you're going to come up with, it's not going to be a true reflection of reality. Um, and how do you get that piece correctly, right? The two very common problems with getting data correct in your system today is one is there's so many systems. You have your CRM with your actual pipeline of what's coming on. You're probably managing your opportunities or your deals in there. Then you have your project management system separately. You probably have a resource management system separately. You might be using some individual time tracking tools. Just getting all of these to talk to each other is sometimes possible, sometimes tedious. A lot of times they're just in silos. So it comes down to how well your team and how diligently your team ends up managing all of these systems in parallel. That's something we completely eliminate with Rocketlane. So how can we automate the flow of data across all of these systems seamlessly? Will ensure that you have very accurate data to forecast with. Secondly, can you completely remove human intervention from this process? Today, let's say you might want to integrate your CRM with your project management system, but then you have a resource management system sitting separately. Now, if a deal closes and you want to create a project and you want to do resourcing, tomorrow if the contract's getting pushed and the customer wants to push out the project by 2 months, is your team going to actually go and update the project management system and the resourcing system on time accurately for you to have a very real time picture of that? These are the things that I want to show how you can solve with Rocketlane. So the place where it all starts for us is your CRM. So today I have Salesforce to show you the whole cycle. But irrespective of which CRM you use, whether it's Salesforce or HubSpot or anything else, you would be able to achieve this. But what we recommend is how can you get visibility into your pipeline way before it converts? Like, don't wait for your opportunities to actually close and then only get the project in Rocketlane or in any of the resource or project management system that you use. Can you preemptively get that information in? So maybe while you're at negotiation state or when you're at 70%, 75% probability of completion, can you get that op to project conversion at that moment itself? When you are actually okay, of course, something has to go wrong in a demo. But yeah, let's say when you are at that completion percentage, can you just get that project into your project management system? And it's not just about getting that project in. Can you also get all the relevant information from that opportunity? And at that point of time, based on the details that you already know about the customer, like when is the close date we expect the customer to go live on? When is it that where is it that a customer is situated? What did they buy? Based on that, what what should the budget of the project be? How many hours were sold to the customer? What rate cards are you supposed to apply? What's a standardized way of implementing this project for your customer? Can you get all of that information from your CRM automatically into your project management system? That's step one of having that really good data in your system. And when you are creating projects in Rocketlane, we have this unique ability to also dip into all of that information in your Salesforce instance and create them with a predefined project plan. Um, so based on the modules that they purchase, the services they opted for, the amount of hours that they purchase, Rocketlane will not just automatically create a project for you, it will also automatically create the perfect, very well tailored plan for that customer in Rocketlane. And it just doesn't stop there, right? Because we're not here to talk about project management, we're actually here to talk about resource management. But this is the foundation on which your resourcing should be based out of, is what actual work is going to happen in this project. And that's the amazing thing about Rocketlane, because it's the one unified system for project management, resource management, time tracking, and all your PSA functions, that you can not just do your task and your phases planning here, but you can also plan what type of roles and what type of skills you need to run this project very accurately. So not only on closing a deal, or on a high probability of closure of a deal, can we create a project with just the perfectly tailored project plan for the customer, but it also understand what roles are needed to fulfill that project plan. And it's not just about how well the plan is crafted, but also, of course, about what exact hours the different roles need to put in. So this again is automatically created for your project. Now, when we say it's automatically created for your project, the source of this information again becomes the project plan. um, Based on the tasks and the efforts planned on the task, the system can automatically turn that task level effort planning into time allocations for the different roles for your project. And the most amazing thing about this is, if you move out, let's say the customer requests to push the contract date by 2 months in Salesforce, so you have to now push that date out by 2 months in Salesforce. Update will automatically come into Rocketlane. It will push out the start date of the project by 2 months. Um, and because this resource allocation plan is coming based on the actual work that's happening in the project, and because it's one system where you have all of this information, this resource allocation plan also get pushed out by 2 months. If you, let's say, tomorrow ended up, if instead of winning the opportunity, if you lose the opportunity, we can even so we can even automate just deletion of this demand off the system on losing that opportunity. So through all of this automation, at a very granular level of one project, what you end up doing is having very accurate snapshot of your reality in terms of where truly time needs to be invested by your team, and where truly the resource demand is coming on from. So you have a very real time, true to reality snapshot of demand of different roles and different skills at a very granular per project level. All of this demand from across all your different projects can layer up to give you a very accurate snapshot of what's your holistic demand in the system. And that might look something like what are the different roles and what's the demand supply of those roles looking like. So here, the view that's very crucial for forecasting is what is the supply that I have, and how do I compare it to the different projects and different roles, and what's the accurate, what's the accumulated demand of all of those different roles in my system, which is what you can get from the capacity planning view. So we started by connecting to your CRM, automating the creation of projects with the very accurate project plan depending on what was there as information on what the customer purchased in your CRM, to automatically creating allocations, keeping them very real time in sync with shifting timelines, and accumulated all of that up to this capacity planning view where you have a snapshot of what's your demand versus what's your supply. Um, and how like you have a very accurate snapshot of demand from your projects in Rocketlane, you have a very accurate snapshot of supply as well. um, it In Rocketlane, your supply is basically the different team members or partners that you're working with. We also capture time offs and holidays, so you have again a very granular, very accurate snapshot of the different people that you have in your system, and what are their working hours, what holiday calendars are they working with, and if they are on leave on a week, if they are applying for time offs. All of this aggregated together gives you a very accurate snapshot of, do you actually have the necessary capacity to take on the different projects that are coming on for next quarter. And while so far we have spoken about just the forecasting aspect of it, I also want to touch upon a very unique module that we have in Rocketlane, which is the Resource AI module. And this helps us target that one granular project in a way where we can holistically plan the entire team of that project together. So we saw that the op that we were working with was the cloud migration op, and then we created the cloud migration project. The project was created with a template which has the task and the resources and the time plan. So you pretty much, so far, your teams didn't have to touch the system to do any kind of mental math or any guesswork of what's needed for this project, how many hours, which roles, and all of that. And the next step would be to, how can your resource management team also seamlessly just staff these projects, right? And staff them in a way where they're not finding one person at a point of time. So if I need one consultant, if I need one director, I'm not going one request by one request. But if I want to holistically staff the project in a way where I'm either balancing my team's workload so that everyone's at an optimal level of utilization, and I'm neither overburdening somebody and nor like it making too much of a bench strength. Um, or the other way around of saying, I want to holistically just make the max margin on this project. So based on the skills that are required to run this project well and the roles that I need, knowing the rates that are applied on the project and the cost of hiring maybe people across different geographies, what is the best margin that I can attain on this project? All of this can be done automatically because, again, we have the entire source data on your demand for the project and the supply of different people and their time and their occupations within one system. So I want to quickly also show how Resource AI works. I've just selected the project that I was working with so far, and I'm going to go and say, I want to actually load balance for people's utilization while staffing this project. So right now the system's going through the requirements that I have on the project, the dates, the allocated hours, and we also have the team members that you have in your system, what they're currently working on, and if you assign this work to them, what would their forecasted utilization become? And as you can see, it's finding people where there's a lot of free bandwidth. If you go to the next step, it can also show you a holistic picture of if you were to run this project with this team, what would be the revenue cost and the target margin you'll end up achieving from this. But maybe 31% doesn't seem that great to us, right? Maybe we want to maximize for margins that we're making here. So it's going to again optimize for the team of the project here, but this time holistically, it's not running to just load balance for people's bandwidth, but it's also trying to find you the maximum bang for the buck that you can make while staffing this. And this is also a place where you can bring in all your skill requirements. So you can mention any skill that would be necessary for a particular role to have to do well on this project. Maybe, or maybe it's a requirement of region or a certain language they can speak, whatever it is that would be needed for the project. And we will go to financials here. 54 is looking pretty good. I can also make adjustments here based on what's required. But if everything's looking well, I can just go over to the allocation section, choose whether I'm confirming this allocation or it's still tentative, and go ahead and staff for the project. And that's all that I wanted to share today about resource management in Rocketlane. And I hope that was interesting. And I think, Ryan, would you want to take some Q&A now?
Yeah, sounds great. I can look through some of the questions here. I was reading these as you were going through your demo. Some interesting questions for sure. So I'm going to start at the top, and I'll just read the question for everyone. Have you ever met the system where you could easily combine floating assignments, random assignments, fixed assignments, and T&M assignments to the project together, or even for one person? 3 hours a week, yeah. So my initial reaction is, gosh, there's a lot going on in that environment. I don't envy that environment at all. Um, it is one where very granular, getting down to some of those hours and some of those things. A couple of things that you could consider is in that type of mixed environment, if you have some really granular type work, could you start to consolidate some of that and say, I'll give you an example. You've got PJ as a resource. PJ has several 2 or 3 hour assignments that he's going to work on, over the course of the week. Could that be treated as some sort of an allocation to work on those tasks and then mix in the bigger things either on top of it or in addition to it, however you want to think about it there? But anytime you've got a whole bunch of really small stuff trying to come together, it gets really challenging. So not an easy way to navigate that, other than to try to bring it up as much of a level as I think you can. So that's a good one there. I'm gonna grab one at. I saw this question and Laura asked it, so I always laugh at this one. Recommendations on the amount of time categories. We're having a heated debate internally right now on the right amount. So time tracking to me is one of the, we've been consulting on it for a long time. One of the places where passion and energy seems to always come out. So Laura, your question was great there. To me, when it comes to time categories, the advice I would offer is measure what you care about. So what is it you care about? And I would challenge you to think about, if you were to get data on a particular time category, are you going to take action on it? Is it something you're going to try to manage or not? And then I think if you ask a couple of those questions and then subscribe to the theory that I think's really critical when it comes to tracking time, the goal is to get people to do it and do it right. So less is always more. If you give them 25 time categories and you ask them to sift through all 25, now you're asking them to slice their time. And I think that reduces accuracy, and I think it just places a lot more strain on people. So less is more. Measure what you care about and what you're going to take action on. Um, so that was a really good one. Um,
I see an interesting one by Angela.
yeah, go ahead.
In consulting firms where the revenue comes from resource management, how do we balance precision for forecast without weighing our PMs down with constant updates? I think this is a very interesting one, right? Nobody likes to update multiple things, and when timelines are shifting constantly, just do people focus on work on just updating systems? And I think that's where it's very important to have a system that can integrate well with your sources of demand. And so let's say maybe you integrate your CRM with your project management system, and and if things are moving on your timeline front in your projects, maybe the project gets stalled or the customer delays it, and even in between when work starts, can it automatically also talk to your resource management system and make those updates accordingly? So if the customer asks to push timelines out by 2 months, um, is it just your project team updating that project start date and the system taking care of it from there, or is it that your current setup actually depends on people going and making those edits manually? So I think the end state here that can be very beneficial for your company to see proper data, and for your teams to not get frustrated, is to really automate a lot of these things that need and require manual intervention.
Yeah, I might just append a couple of things. I'll be the process part of that. So, Angela, I appreciate the question. Good to have you on with us. Yeah, good to talk again. To me, in that environment, you really have a choice, and it's a tough choice, right? You're placing a lot of burden in some cases on project managers, and so using technology and automation to offload some of that, I think, is fantastic. If you don't get those updates in the system, you run the risk of making decisions off of inaccurate data, which we know is problematic. And so I think in tackling this, I would go to the root cause. If there's a lot of project shifting going on, I would want to attack that first and figure out what's causing all the shifting. And if you can shift less, the problem starts to become less. If you can't, and in some cases, the answer is probably we can't. We've tried, we can't. You have to either go the automation route or have something step in and take some of the administrative burden off of the project managers, whether that's a project coordinator doing the updates on their behalf or whatever it might be. But I would attack the root cause and try to go there first. I think we just ran out of time there.
Yeah, I think we're at time. Would you want to take one last question, Ryan?
Sure, we can definitely do that. Well, maybe go to the one at the top here. Laura asked the question: best method to get decision making more centralized versus many cooks in the kitchen, and then any recommendations to scale. Seeing some growth going from 25 consultants to 100 consultants, and only currently have one resource manager. So growth and scale is going to get interesting. The too many cooks in the kitchen, I'm super sensitive to. I'm going to take you the process route on this one as well, and just say where my mind goes is establishing a charter for the resource management function. I realize it's an army of one with one resource manager, but establishing a charter that enables decision making, and the charter has to be one of those things for resource management that's not just a piece of paper or a PowerPoint slide or something like that. It's something that has to get documented, has to be blessed with leadership support, and then taking it on the road and socializing it with all those cooks that want to be in the kitchen. And whatever leadership is empowering in terms of a decision making process, I think that the charter can help serve as the vehicle to get all that established. The growth and scale from 25 to 100, gosh, my mind is spinning with all the challenges that's going to present when you quadruple the workforce. First things first, use the time now to put your resource management processes in place and get your data right. So we talked a lot about that today. If you don't, when you go from 25 to 100, it's going to be a mess. So invest the time now in the infrastructure and the framework, get your technology right to go with that. I think that's super important to do that. Your ratio doesn't give me too much concern yet. So going from a 1 to 25, resource managers probably loving life, only being responsible for 25 consultants. When you go to 100, not saying it's impossible. What I would look at is the nature of assignments and how much churn go with those 100 consultants. If you're working in a what I would call a set it and forget it model where an assignment is, a year or 18 months, you can run a little bit higher ratio at, 100 to 1 or something like that. If it's like our previous example where these assignments are 2 hours, 3 hours, a mixed bag, couple days here and there, your ratio is going to have to be much, much less. And so as your organization scales, you're also going to need to scale your resource management function and add at least another one, if not maybe a couple more. But it all depends on nature of assignment and amount of churn. So that's a fantastic question.
It was lovely talking to you today, Ryan, about all the resource management insights and practices that you've sort of learned over the years.
Awesome, awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It was great to be with you and talk forecasting capacity planning. Best of luck as you go forward.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in today. Hope you had a very fruitful session.